Welcome to NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. I'm Adam Rank. That's Kimmy Checks. That over there is Marcus Grant getting you ready for the fantasy playoffs. Kimmy, how you living?
I'm so good. Hello. Happy Sunday, guys. Happy week 14. I'm like, what week is it now? It's crazy.
14.
It's fantasy playoffs. It's week 14. It's a very tense day in my house. My fiance roots for the Dolphins. I very clearly root for the Kansas City Chiefs. So a lot on the line, including our engagement. So we'll see how today ends. Marcus, how are you?
It's going to be really awkward for the next week around there is what it sounds like, regardless of how that game turns out. So you enjoy that one. I'm sitting here and I'm hydrating. I'm trying to just stay. It's playoff time. This is what we've been waiting for. So let's go. Let's fire it up.
Yeah, and one of the things that we're going to be playing for this season or this year, whatever. Oh, the fantasy trophy. Look how handsome this trophy is. And you know what? You can bring one of these home by going to NFL.com/fantasy trophy. And you can bring one in and have your league do it. Listen, pass a motion. Tell your league mates, hey, we're all going to throw in a couple of bucks. We're buying this trophy. You bring it out. What you do is you bring it to the draft. You have a good time with it. It's a lot of fun. And by the way, if you want to help, if you need help in the fantasy playoffs today, be sure to hit us up on Twitter at NFL Fantasy. Or if you're watching the show via YouTube, youtube.com/NFL, our own Michael F. Florio is in the comments section answering questions. Never go to the comments section, but there he is. Florio doesn't care. He puts on his floral sweatshirt that Nicolette got him because he looks dapper, and we love him, and he's answering all your questions. One of the biggest questions, I think, for today, and I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I think Justin Herbert, a lot of people have questions about him coming off a poor performance last week against the New England Patriots. Kimmy, do you have any hesitation starting Justin Herbert today?
No, absolutely not. No. Adam Rank, is the sky blue?
Yeah, actually it is.
Good. Okay, if the sky's blue, it is obvious that you're starting Justin Herbert, especially against the Atlanta Falcons. This is matchup heaven for him. The Falcons are allowing the most fantasy points to quarterbacks this season. They've also allowed a top 5 quarterback in 5 games. Justin Herbert is going to make that 6 top 5 quarterbacks this season. He's phenomenal. Fire him up. No worries.
I know last week was really bad against the Patriots, but that's sort of what the Patriots do, especially to rookie quarterbacks, and they had him befuddled. I'm not worried about it. The Falcons don't really offer that sort of a challenge, even though they have been better lately than they were at the start of the year. I expect this to be a fairly high-scoring game. I would have said more high-scoring when Julio Jones is going to be available, but even still, I expect a lot of points, and I think Justin Herbert's going to bounce back.
Well, can you say spoiler alert next time? Because we haven't gotten to the injury boards yet to see who's going to be in and who's going to be out. We can go ahead and do that right now. Let's take a look at some of the most notable actives. We'll start with the morning games to us on the West Coast. These are the morning games. Let's start with the good news. Let's start with the happy talk. Kenyon Drake is going to be active. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, even though he was active last week, we did not see him on the field. Hopefully that'll change this week. Ezekiel Elliott had a calf injury pop up during the middle of the week. He is healthy, or he's ready to go. DeAndre Hopkins is active. Some of the guys who are inactive, Myles Gaskin, David Johnson, Christian McCaffrey, Brandon Cooks, and of course, DJ Moore is inactive versus the Broncos. Those are just the morning games. Let's take a look at the afternoon games. The guys who are not going to be playing, Antonio Gibson, we anticipated that. Kenny Golladay has not played for a number of weeks. And of course, as Marcus just mentioned, Julio Jones is going to be inactive. But 2 running backs, Josh Jacobs, DeAndre Swift, will be active. Everybody on Instagram thinks it's a trap that Josh Jacobs is playing. I do not have that fear. I think the Colts have given up a lot of production over the last month. But one of the games I want to circle back to, it's that early slate of games. Chicago playing host to the Houston Texans. David Johnson is out. Kimmy, let me ask you, is Duke Johnson a good play this week?
I don't know, because there's been 3 games this season where David Johnson has not played and Duke Johnson has stepped up as the lead back for the Houston offense, and he's not really been able to capitalize in his absence and put up huge numbers. However, the Chicago Bears have largely defended their run well, except the last few weeks. They've allowed 3 touchdowns since the start of Week 12. Now, Duke Johnson, he also plays a part of that Texans passing game, which could threaten Chicago in multiple ways. But all of that combined, I still don't know if I have the faith to play him in these fantasy playoffs, in these situations where it's a must-win scenario. I think I would only use him as an emergency flex at best.
One of the guys who's been carrying fantasy teams this season is Antonio Gibson. He went out in that game against the Pittsburgh Steelers with a toe injury. He is not going to be playing. So, Marcus, if you're going to be starting one of the running backs from the FT, which one do you prefer?
It's J.D. McKissic. We keep talking, we've said all year about the value of a target versus just a carry, and a target being about 3 times more valuable. We know that's what McKissic does. Peyton Barber's going to get on the field. He will get his opportunities. Hopefully he doesn't get too many chances down near the goal line, because that certainly would cut into McKissic's production and his value. But the fact is, he is the pass-catching running back, and he will do that again this week. So of those 2 FTRBs, JD is the guy that I want.
Kimmy, CMC is going to be out against the Broncos, missing an opportunity to go up against his dad's former team. Mike Davis, once again, is expected to step up. Will we see the good Mike Davis that we saw earlier in the year?
I think we will, especially against the Broncos, who have been a little bit inconsistent against running backs. They did a good job shutting down the Miami Dolphins and the Chiefs in weeks 11 and 13, but then they gave up a ton of points to the Raiders and the Saints in weeks 10 and 12. In those games versus the Raiders and the Saints, the defense averaged 188 rushing yards and 3 rushing touchdowns that they gave up to running backs. I think if they're not so good against the run, Mike Davis is going to shine and continue to help fill the void of CMC.
In those afternoon games, our own Ian Rappaport is reporting that DeAndre Swift is expected to play this week against the Green Bay Packers, which would be a great matchup. But Marcus, would you trust getting Swift into your lineup?
I really wouldn't, not this week. I mean, the reports have been sort of, I won't say conflicting, it feels incomplete, right? I mean, we know he came through the concussion protocol. He's been dealing with an illness. There's just been so many things that have had him either out of practice or limited in practice. I just have this feeling that, obviously they say he's expected to play, but even if he's on the field, that he's not going to get the kind of workload that we want from him, that we have seen from him when he's been healthy the last few weeks. So I think we're going to get a heavy dose of Adrian Peterson. And there's one thing we know, that Peterson has a nose for the end zone, and he will probably get those carries down near the goal line. So this is a week that, it sort of stinks, because Swift has been playing well, and we love the matchup, but it just feels really hard to trust him today.
All right, very well. Time now for 15 for 15, presented by Geico. And you know what that means. It's Sunday FUNDAY! Let's talk about some of our top starts of the week. And we'll start. Let's start at the quarterback position. Here are the startums for the quarterback position. And Tom Brady is a guy that I trust this week. Deshaun Watson, the quarterback I wanted the Bears to draft in 2017. And, of course, Justin Herbert, we like him, like Phillip Rivers and Josh Allen. The Titans are in Jacksonville this week. You see Ryan Tannehill on the board. Marcus, how do you feel about this matchup?
I feel really good about the Ryan Tannehill versus the Jags. Jacksonville's given up the 4th most fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. They're not getting a lot of pressure on quarterbacks, and Tannehill very quietly is the QB7 heading into the week. So he is playing some good football. I expect that's going to continue. And I can't tell you which Jaguars receiver to pinpoint, because that feels like sort of a Titans receiver to pinpoint. I would say both A.J. Brown and Corey Davis are good starts this week, but I definitely like their quarterback.
Rank, your board was so good that I want to steal Tom Brady off of it, especially with that matchup against the Minnesota Vikings. Anytime I bet against Tom Brady, he goes out and does the opposite, and he puts up like QB3 numbers. So I'm going to just go ahead and go with him this week and hope that he is good and can deliver against Minnesota. He's had 21-plus fantasy points in 2 of the last 3 games, 2-plus passing touchdowns in 3 straight games. Plus, the Vikings are allowing the 8th most fantasy yards to quarterbacks this season, almost 300 passing yards a game, 24 passing touchdowns to QBs. I think Tom Brady is an easy TB12 QB1 start.
All right, let's go to the running backs. Aaron Jones, probably the greatest matchup of the weekend, going up against the Detroit Lions. Jonathan Taylor is one that I get a lot of questions about. I really like him this week at Las Vegas. Melvin Gordon, who I've tried to cancel all season, but you know what? He's got a great matchup. The Panthers have allowed the 6th most fantasy points to running backs this season. Gordon has had 15 fantasy points in 2 out of his last 3 games. One matchup that it's not necessarily favorable. The Falcons have one of the top run defenses. So, Kimmy, are you confident in Austin Eckler this week?
Yo, I am confident in this entire Chargers offense. I'm going to fire up Justin Herbert, Austin Eckler, and Keenan Allen. That's later on in the show. But yes, I do like Austin Eckler today against the Atlanta Falcons. He is ranked 8th amongst running backs for scrimmage yards this season, almost 100 scrimmage yards per game this season. He's also tied 10th most fantasy points by the running back position, just over 16 points. I understand that the matchup may not be good, but since returning in week 12, he's averaging almost 18 fantasy points a game. I think the matchup is going to be fine, and Austin Eckler is going to ball out.
Well, I'm looking at David Montgomery, and our pal and I guess colleague Brad Evans always refers to him as mandatory Montgomery. I don't know that that's always been the case, but this week I think it definitely is against the Houston Texans, because the Texans have defensively just struggled pretty much in every facet. I mean, they have struggled against the pass and really against the run. Second most fantasy points per game to the running back position. They have given up the most rushing yards to back so far this year. And Montgomery's been playing well lately, so I think he keeps the hot streak going this week.
And ever since Bill Lazor has taken over the play-calling duties for the Chicago Bears, Montgomery has stolen the show. Cole Kmet is also one of those guys, too, that kind of factors in. We'll talk about him in just a moment. Let's move to the wide receiver position, and let's take a look at my stardom board right here. T.Y. Hilton, we were talking about this before the show. Our producer, Hytham, was like, do you start T.Y. Hilton? And I really do believe in it. I believe in Cole Beasley. Tyler Boyd, I love his fighting spirit. Corey Davis, Kiki, Allen Robinson, those guys playing in that game in Chicago, the Deshaun Watson, Mitch Trubisky Bowl. But let's talk about this, because obviously earlier in the show we talked about and gave our full support to Justin Herbert. Are we on board with Keenan Allen then, Marcus?
Yes, we are. Absolutely. We keep talking about this matchup against the Falcons defense and what have you, and part of what has been so great about having Justin Herbert at quarterback for the Chargers is that he really has been locked in to Keenan Allen most of the year. I mean, as much as we love Tyrod, the numbers just I don't think would be the same with Tyrod Taylor at quarterback over Justin Herbert. And so I think that you're going to see Keenan Allen get a ton of – wouldn't be surprised if you see Keenan Allen get in the neighborhood of 15 targets in this game and end up having some huge numbers.
I love Keenan Allen. I just love, and he really is becoming wide receiver one with Justin Herbert as his quarterback. But a guy I like today is Corey Davis facing Jacksonville. I also like A.J. Brown, like Marcus alluded to earlier. I think both these guys are a good start. But Corey Davis specifically, this is what I want to focus in on. He's had more receptions and receiving yards than A.J. Brown this season, even though both guys have played 10 games. Now, this is such a good matchup because Jacksonville have allowed a top 10 fantasy wide receiver in 4 straight games, and they're also allowing the second most fantasy points to wide receivers since week 9. We know that Corey Davis, he's not going to fumble and drop the ball right before the end zone. He's actually going to deliver and get through to get you +6. So I love him today against Jacksonville.
Yeah, he's a fantastic start. Absolutely. Let's take a look, though, at the tight end boards. And I don't have Jonnu Smith on here, and I think that, when you're talking about that matchup, I kind of like Jonnu Smith. I don't know why. He had 2 touchdowns earlier. But some of the guys I do like on this board, Darren Waller, Hunter Henry, again, expecting the huge bounce back from Justin Herbert. Eric Ebron has had at least 10 targets in back-to-back games. Rob Gronkowski not only is getting targeted, he's getting early down targets, which I really like. Mike Gesicki, 9 targets last week, putting a lot of faith in him. And, of course, Cole Kmet, K-M-E-T. Anybody out here in Southern California remembers the mighty Met of Southern California. Dial him up. Bill Lazor loves him. He's been featured over the last couple of weeks. And that was 15 for 15 presented by Geico. Up next, it's win or go home. So we've got our favorite heroes and villains for the first round of the playoffs. We're talking big time here, like major heroes like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson in Skyscraper. So amazing in that movie. Like, that's how you follow up San Andreas. He was in an impossible situation, and he did it. What is not an impossible situation is getting Travis Kelce into your lineup. Okay, if you don't draft him in the first round next year, I will not have done my job. You're watching NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. All right, here are the starting defenses for Week 14. Saints, pretty obvious. I like the Panthers this week. An overlooked one, the good matchup against the Denver Broncos. The Browns might not necessarily be a great matchup this week, but their next two games are fantastic. You know what? If I'm being perfectly honest, I wouldn't mind playing the Texans in a dire situation. Washington, San Francisco, those are two. Packers against the Detroit Lions. I've been saying Detroit wrong forever, apparently, as one of our friends on Twitter keeps reminding me. It's not Detroit, it's Detroit. Hey, welcome back to NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. Rank, checks, Grant, there they go. By the way, if you have a question for us on Twitter, you don't have to just question my pronunciation of words. You can actually ask us fantasy questions. You know, that it's a weird thing, but you can actually do that. Hit us up at NFL Fantasy. Of course, if you're watching the show via YouTube, youtube.com/NFL. Our own Michael F. Florio is there answering questions, but I don't want him to have all the fun. So let's take a look at some of the fan questions that are coming in today. Tough decision. DJ Chark, CeeDee Lamb, Kimmy Checks. Which one of these players are you going to go with?
Ooh, I'm probably going to rock with CeeDee Lamb on this one. I actually think Andy Dalton's not a horrible start today. Kind of a revenge game for him. DJ Chark has been so incredibly inconsistent. I'm rocking with CeeDee.
Oh, it's a revenge Sunday for sure. Marvin Jones Jr. or Michael Pittman Jr.? Marcus, who are you going with?
I think I'm going to go with Marvin Jones. I like Michael Pittman, but I feel like the ceiling is higher for Marvin Jones, especially, again, another week with no Kenny Golladay for the Lions.
Yeah, I'm worried about Jair Alexander, though. That's one to watch there. Anyways, Mark Andrews, Mike Gesicki, PPR. Gosh, Mark Andrews normally seems like such a automatic start. I'd actually go with Gesicki. I know that he's put up touchdowns in a couple of games, but the 9 targets last week really stand out to me. Devontae Parker's actually taken a step back. It seems like Tua really likes going to his tight end, so I feel confident going with Gesicki this week. Marquise Hollywood Brown or Adrian Peterson in the flex non-PPR league. Kimmy, which way are you leaning?
AP all the way on this one. He's had back-to-back games with 17-plus fantasy points, stepping up in the absence of DeAndre Swift. We still don't know what that situation is going to be. I know, and Marcus said earlier, AP has a nose for the end zone. He gets in and he scores, so I'm going to rock with him today.
All right, one final question, Marcus. I'll throw this to you. Mike Evans or Josh Jacobs?
Ooh, I think I'm worried about Josh Jacobs. I am. So I'm going to lean toward Mike Evans. No, you know what? I'm talking myself through this. I'm going to go Josh Jacobs here. Just because the volume of touches. I mean, this is a tough call because I am worried about Josh Jacobs against that Colts defense. But volume of touches and potential goal line opportunities, I'll go Josh Jacobs.
Yeah, the Colts have allowed the third most fantasy points to running backs over the last 4 weeks. So I think this is a better start than people are anticipating. And continue, please, to send in these questions. We'll try to get as many answered as possible. But right now, it's time for Fantasy Heroes. Just for one day, or maybe multiple weeks. You can be our hero for 3 weeks. We would like that as well. Marcus, why don't you kick us off with a fantasy hero for today?
Aaron Jones has been a hero for a good chunk of the season for a lot of folks, and I think that continues today. I mean, this Lions defense has not been very good, and I know they got a win last week, but they still gave up a lot of points to the Bears in that game. So I think pretty much all the Packers you have are in smash spots. It's to the point that we're getting tweets and questions about whether or not people in deep leagues should be starting Jamal Williams because they're expecting garbage time points against the Lions. So Aaron Jones, I think, is going to be you see on the screen there, 45 points when these teams played in week 2. I think you could expect certainly in the neighborhood of 20, 25 points maybe as a floor this week for Jones.
You know who also has a safe floor this week and for the rest of the fantasy playoffs? Derrick Henry is playing the Jacksonville Jaguars today, and that's no big deal for Derrick Henry. 1, he's one of the best running backs in the league. 2, the matchup is there at Jacksonville, allowing the 3rd most scrimmage yards per game to running backs this season, also allowing the 4th most fantasy points to running backs this season. This is the type of situation where Derrick Henry could go on a playoff run where he puts up at least 30 points these next few weeks. So Derrick Henry, absolutely a fantasy hero, not just in week 14, but for the remainder of the season.
Well, you guys picked really good running backs. I think that sometimes you got to find the obscure guy, the Wedge Antilles. You know, the only rebel pilot who is in both bombing runs of the Death Star. Spoiler alert, by the way. In any event, that's why I'm looking at J.D. McKissic, because I'm looking at the way, obviously this is an Alex Smith revenge game. The way he gets revenge is throwing underneath and dumping it off to his running back. McKissick played 74% of the snaps last week with Antonio Gibson out. He had 10 targets to lead the team. I anticipate a very similar type of game script today. So I'm going to go with J.D. McKissick because that's what my playoffs have come down to. Now, though, let's talk about some fantasy villains like the Daniel LaRussos of the fantasy world this week, players who will underperform. Marcus, who do you got?
I'm looking at Kyler Murray. It's just a scary situation with him. The last few weeks have not been we have not seen the Kyler that we saw early in the season, and we've talked for some of the reasons about this. I mean, there's a good chance that maybe the shoulder injury is more serious than either the player or the team is letting on. But whatever the reason is, Kyler is not running the football very effectively. He's got 61 combined yards rushing in his last 3 games. I mean, he was picking up 60 yards, it seemed like, in a half early in the season. And so, I mean, this is sort of like, I mean, right, I don't know, like Sinestro once upon a time was good, and now and then he turned evil. Like, I feel like this is sort of a Sinestro type situation we're seeing here.
I'm not convinced that Sinestro's a bad guy, but anyways, I'm sorry, Kim, I interrupted.
I have no idea who Sinestro is, so that just shows where I'm at. All right, and we're talking about villains. I got to talk about Miles Sanders, and I hate to say it because we had such high expectations, especially when we've seen so many injuries at the running back position. You want to find a running back, you want to stick with them. But Miles Sanders is not your guy, especially today against the New Orleans Saints. They're allowing the fewest fantasy points to running backs this season. They have not allowed a 100-plus yard rusher in 50 straight games. 50. Miles Sanders is not going to be able to put up any type of consistent numbers. He's had fewer than 10 fantasy points in 3 straight games. His fantasy points have also decreased in those last 3 games. It's just not there matchup-wise, and he's just not playing good football right now.
Yeah, that's a tough situation. I have to start Miles Sanders in my OC Comics League, and I'm not feeling great about it. I also wouldn't feel great about starting Devontae Parker this week. Now, I love Tua, love him, but we need Ryan Fitzmagic because so far going with Tua is kind of like hanging out with your friend the night before he has to give a presentation in the morning. Like, it's fine, but it's not as cool as it could be. You know what I'm saying? Like, Fitzmagic is like 2 a.m., on the final night of your friend's bachelor party. It's a scene. It's wild. It could end up horribly, super fun. And Parker has just been kind of living that life. So we need him because he's averaging less than 10 fantasy points per game with Tua, over 15 with Fitzmagic. But you know what? What are you going to do? So those were fantasy heroes and villains, and that's going to be that for that. So just check this out. One of the biggest stars in sports returned to his former glory recently, and it was awesome. And you know I'm talking about Sting making his debut in AEW. Oh, but also Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. They were good. Do we trust them this week? Find out next when we dive into this week's biggest fantasy dilemmas. You're watching NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. There is Tua. Listen, Tua, I didn't mean anything bad about what I was talking about. I'm a big fan. I like what you're doing. I like, we're both lefties. I've got nothing against you, but you're ruining Devontae Parker's value. Just throw it to Devontae, although I'm starting Gesicki. I was saying that, so don't listen to what I'm saying. Hey, welcome back to NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. I am Adam Rank along the side of Kimmy Checks. Marcus Grant getting you ready for the fantasy playoffs, and it's time now to play Fantasy Face-Off. Yeah, we're going to put some players head-to-head, take their faces right out of it. We're just going to have them go head-to-head, do anything like that. We'll start at the quarterback position. It's going to be rapid fire. It's going to be cool. It's going to be fun. Let's start. Better start this week, Lamar Jackson versus the Browns or Taysom Hill versus the Eagles. Kimmy, where are you going?
Taysom Hill. He scored more fantasy points in his first 3 career starts than Justin Herbert, Kyler Murray, and Lamar Jackson. I know it's spicy, but Taysom Hill.
That's wrong. We're going with Taysom Hill right there. So, Josh Allen versus the Steelers. Big Ben versus the Bills. Marcus.
It's Josh Allen all day. I mean, he's got a higher rushing floor than Big Ben. I mean, he's still the goal line back there in Buffalo. Ben has been sort of inconsistent. Josh Allen all day.
That is correct. All right, Ryan Tannehill versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. Kyler Murray versus the Giants. Kimmy, go.
Ryan Tannehill all the way. You just heard Marcus say that Kyler Murray could be a fantasy villain. The matchup is there. Jacksonville allowing the 4th most fantasy points to QBs. Fire up, Tanny.
That is correct. Good job. All right, Tom Brady versus the Vikings. Phillip Rivers versus the Raiders. Marcus.
I'm going to go with touchdown Tommy here in fantasy. Now, in a foot race, maybe I go No, I still go Tom Brady in a foot race, too. So Tom Brady's the answer.
All right, Marcus, you're 2-0. Perfect. Woo! To the quarterback position. Let's move on to running backs. Raheem Mostert versus the Washington FT. Jonathan Taylor versus the Raiders. Kimmy.
Give me JTT. I just want to be correct on this one. Give me Jonathan Taylor. He's had 15-plus fantasy points in 2 straight games. I think the volume's going to be there, plus a way better matchup against the Raiders.
Kimmy is correct. Good job. Better start Giovanni Bernard versus the Cowboys or Ronald Jones versus the Vikings. Marcus.
All right, so I'm going to peel back the curtain here. When we first put this question together, I thought Leonard Fournette was still playing, so I said Gio Bernard, but I think maybe Ronald Jones, but for the continuity of the show, I'm going to say Gio Bernard against the Cowboys.
Yeah, you already see it in the rundown. I'm like, sorry, wrong. We're going to go with Ronald Jones. I love Ronald Jones today. The Buccaneers need to get to running the football. Melvin Gordon versus the Panthers or James Conner versus the Bills. Kimmy.
James Conner, even though I know you're going to try to make an argument for Melvin Gordon, James Conner, he's had 15-plus touches in 8 out of 9 games. I know Melvin Gordon has been playing well recently, but he's burned me too many times.
All right, we'll call that one a draw. All right, I'll give that. You made a compelling argument. We'll call that one a draw. Clyde Edwards-Helaire or J.K. Dobbins. Marcus.
I'm going to say J.K. Dobbins. I don't really love either of these guys this week, but I'm going to say Dobbins. He seems to score more touchdowns.
Yeah, we were looking for none of the above. Hopefully you can find some other matchup. Let's move on to the wide receiver position. We've got a couple of Pittsburgh Steelers, Chase Claypool or Juju Smith-Schuster. Kimmy, go.
Chase Claypool, he has way bigger of a higher upside. He's had 10 total touchdowns this season. That's 5th most against wide receivers. Juju's been very volatile, kind of up and down. I think I'm going to go with the higher upside in Chase Claypool.
Oh, Kimmy, that's correct. Chase Claypool, Tyler Lockett, or Antonio Brown for the versus the Vikings. Marcus.
Lock it up. I know it's been volatile for Tyler Lockett, but there's still pretty much just 2 targets in Seattle. It's just him and DK Metcalf, whereas Tom Brady's got a lot of guys to spread the football out to, so I'm going to say Tyler Lockett.
Good job, Marcus. Wrong, but good job. Anyways, let's go Deebo Samuel versus the Washington FT. T.Y. Hilton versus the Raiders. Kimmy.
Show me Deebo Samuel. He's had 12-plus fantasy points in 4 straight games, over 100 receiving yards over the last 2 games combined. So I'm going to rock with Deebo, and you're going to tell me I'm right?
I'm going to say my grandma gave me that chain. No, I absolutely agree with you. Deebo Samuel. You don't want to bench him. I like Brandon Ayuk a lot as well, but I think I'd play Deebo over T.Y. Terry McLaurin versus the 49ers. Robbie Anderson versus the Broncos. Marcus.
I'm going to go with Scary Terry. I mean, he's just been so consistent all year. I know he had kind of a bad game against the Steelers. I think he bounces back, and I would definitely have him in my lineup.
Yeah, I would agree with that, too. I like Scary Terry as well. You know what? I wasn't keeping score, so I'm going to say it's a draw. You both win, and all the winners are everybody out there getting this great advice. And speaking of that, it is time now for Fantasy Insurance presented by Geico. And let's talk about some of our favorite sleepers for this week. And Kimmy, we'll kick it off with you. Who's one of your favorite sleepers?
All right, I'm going to go a little deep on this one, but he's been good the last few weeks, so don't at me on this one. It's Colin Johnson playing the Tennessee Titans today. I know this pass catching situation for Jacksonville is a little bit confusing, but Colin Johnson has kind of showed up on the radar. He's had double-digit fantasy points in consecutive games, and the Titans are allowing the third most fantasy points to wide receivers this season. They've also allowed 4 top 20 fantasy wide receivers over the last 2 games combined. I think there's a huge opportunity for Colin Johnson to continue to be involved. So let's fire him up as a sleeper.
I like that. Colin Johnson's been playing well lately. I'm going to go with Curtis Samuel, though, for the Panthers playing against the Denver Broncos. And a lot of this has to do with the guys who aren't going to be there. No Christian McCaffrey, no DJ Moore. And the one thing the Panthers have done effectively is use Curtis Samuel in multiple ways. I think we'll see him get down the field as a receiver. We'll see him get the ball out of the backfield as a runner. He's the reason he's the only reason I have any sort of trepidation about Mike Davis at all. But I do think Curtis Samuel is in for a number of touches and could be really productive today.
I'm going to be going with Tim Patrick. I don't know what he has to do to get on everybody's fantasy radar. He has had double-digit fantasy points in 4 out of his last 5 games. Of course, that came with a 20-point outburst against the Kansas City Chiefs in Week 13. The Carolina Panthers have allowed 7 top 24 receivers in their last 5 games. So if you're sitting there, you saw the inactives, you saw guys like Julio Jones not playing today, Brandon Cooks, players like that. If you need to go pick somebody up off the waiver wire right now, you should take a look at Tim Patrick. And that was Fantasy Insurance presented by Geico. Now, coming up, for the first 10 or so weeks, Russell Wilson was cooking up fantasy wins for us. Now I'm afraid I'm going to have to go back and update that Yelp review because it's been terrible recently. Can he rectify the situation against the Jets? Well, we'll discuss that coming up next. You're watching NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. Oh, and there is Deshaun Watson wearing the wrong uniform in Soldier Field. Like, legitimately, I said, and I was on the Scott Farrell show, Farrell on the bench. I was saying Deshaun Watson was the most automatic quarterback coming out of that draft. I know Patrick Mahomes has been playing fantastic. He's great. Deshaun Watson's the one that sticks with me because that seemed like the most realistic. Like, that really could have happened based on everything. Listen, I'm just rambling now. Hey, welcome back to NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. Rank, Kimmy Checks, Marcus Grant getting you ready with some burning questions. And let's start with a guy we talked about going into the break, Russell Wilson. Marcus, are we worried about Russell Wilson this week?
I'm worried that he might score too many points. No, it's not really a worry. I'm fine with Russell Wilson this week. This is a bounce back week waiting to happen against the New York Metropolitans. They have struggled pretty much all year long, but especially over the last 4 weeks, giving up a ton of fantasy points to the quarterback position. So I do think this is a week that Russell Wilson kind of gets right offensively, and he's going to bring his receivers with him, right? DK Metcalf, we know at this point, is a must start each and every week. I said I like Tyler Lockett potentially in this game too, so I think these Seahawks are going to do a lot of damage against the Jets defense.
Absolutely, 100% agree. You mentioned that the Jets aren't so hot against quarterbacks. They're actually allowing the third most fantasy points to QBs. Russell Wilson, on the other hand, is averaging almost 3 passing touchdowns a game, the second most in the league. Like you said, I think all of his pass catchers are going to have a heavy involvement against the New York Metropolitans, so Russ will finally be cooking yet again.
And one thing to think about for next week is Russell will be playing on the road at the Washington FT, a team that has been shutting down opposing quarterbacks. You might want to start planning today to possibly make a move for next week. But let's talk about another quarterback, Josh Allen, who's got a tough matchup this week against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Kimmy, would you have any hesitation going with Josh Allen?
No, yes, he just shined in prime time. He threw for almost 400 passing yards, 4 passing touchdowns. I think he finished with just over 30 fantasy points. I know it could be worrisome because of the matchup, but this is a must-win situation for all of us who are into fantasy playoffs, and there really aren't a lot of other quarterbacks I trust more than Josh Allen.
I'll tell you I'm mildly worried, but not enough to keep me from starting him. The Steelers have been very tough on quarterbacks this year. There's no denying that. But I keep coming back to the rushing floor, the fact that they get down near the goal line. Even, they get around the 10-yard line, and there's a very good chance that Josh Allen could just run it in from there. So that is enough for me to believe that the floor can be pretty safe. But I'd be lying to you if I said I wasn't at least a little bit concerned about him against the Steelers.
I mean, I think that with Russell or Josh or any of these guys, there's always going to be hesitation just because we've seen them not play well. It's the fantasy playoffs. It's okay to be scared, but I think that you're going to be starting Josh Allen this week unless you have some sort of real conundrum where you have Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes, because then I would just go with Patrick Mahomes, which is a scenario. I'm sure there's 4 people out there that have that. But let's talk about Ezekiel Elliott, who I will say this last week. I don't think that Zeke played poorly. He had a tough matchup against the Ravens. So, Kim, I'll go back to you. What do you think about him this week against the Cincinnati Bengals?
I mean, in this scenario, I just went from saying I'm not worried about Josh Allen at all. This is a situation where I'm a little bit worried about Ezekiel Elliott, but I have to start him, right? I really don't have a lot of other running back options. He's had single-digit fantasy points in 4 of the last 6 games, which is a concern. However, it is a decent matchup against the Bengals. So I don't know. I just got to fire him up. It's a fantasy playoffs. And again, I really don't have that many better options.
That's the thing I keep coming back to is that what other options do you have where you're going to sit Zeke? Now, I've had people kind of hit me up and ask questions, and they have listed off several running backs. And I'm like, all right, I can make an argument for sitting Zeke here. But chances are most people aren't there. I do have concerns, though. I mean, he generally just hasn't played well. The offensive line has not been great in front of him. So I am worried, but again, I have him in a situation where he's going to be in my lineup, and I'm going to hope for the best against the Bengals.
I'm starting Miles Sanders in a league, so I would love to have the conundrum of whether I start Ezekiel Elliott or not. So I feel like most people, unless you've got – and you know what, like if you would have picked up Antonio Gibson and players like that during the course of the season – you still wouldn't be able to play him. So I think we're going to go with Ezekiel Elliott this week, and you're going to be just fine. That's a great matchup. Now, check it out. Still to come. We're going to be answering your fan questions and running through our must-starts at every position to get you 1 win closer. Okay, you were a little early there, Zach. I'm so sorry. Because it's Sunday FUNDAY! You're watching NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. We'll see you back in just a few moments. There is DeAndre Hopkins playing this week. Of course, you know, one of the top receivers drafted in fantasy football this season. Some inconsistent performances. Hopefully he can get back on track. He and Kyler Murray. They have a lot of fantasy managers nervous this week, but I do have faith in DeAndre Hopkins. And now it's time for 15 minutes to kickoff, presented by Geico. Let's take a look at that injury report. Of course, DeAndre Hopkins is active, as well as his teammate Kenyon Drake, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Ezekiel Elliott, 2 running backs who will be active for you. But wow, the list of inactive players, stunning. Myles Gaskin, David Johnson, Christian McCaffrey. Pick 101 is going to be out this week against the Denver Broncos, and Brandon Cooks, DJ Moore, also inactive. Those are the early games. Let's take a look at some of the late game inactives. Antonio Gibson, Kenny Golladay, Julio Jones, one of the top receivers off the board in fantasy, will not be playing this week. But some good news, Josh Jacobs, DeAndre Swift, both expected to play. The Raiders, decent matchup against the Colts this week, and the Lions play the Packers. Again, another favorable matchup. And that was 15 minutes to kickoff, presented by Geico. Welcome back to the show. Joining us right now, along with Kimmy Checks and Marcus Grant, that is Michael F. Florio. How you doing, Mike?
I'm good. I broke out the floral just for you, Rank, and it's the fantasy playoffs. I mean, how can we not all be super excited right now?
All right, well, you've done a great job of answering all of our fans' questions. Before I ask you the most asked about players, why don't I turn to Kimmy and Marcus? Who do you think the most asked about player was this morning?
I'm just going to do a blanket statement of running backs, because there are so many injuries and guys that are not playing that I feel like, just looking at my own Twitter feed, there were like 5 million running back options that everyone was trying to question, because it's a mess today.
I'm going to sort of take that and sort of narrow it down. I'm going to say DeAndre Swift, just because the matchup is so good, but the reports on him have been so kind of questionable. So I'm going to say DeAndre Swift.
So that is a great guess from both of you. There was a lot of running back questions. DeAndre Swift, I would say, was the most asked about running back, but there was one wide receiver that I think topped him, and it was everyone's favorite player to sing his name, Kiki QT, with Brandon Cooks being out this week, getting a lot of questions about him. Some players I said I would use over him were Amari Cooper, Michael Thomas, Melvin Gordon at the flex position. But then I like Kiki a lot, and some receivers I said I have him higher than this week are Chase Claypool. I have him over Juju Smith-Schuster. So just some other names there that I like Kiki. I have Kiki in my top 24 wide receivers right now. I like him a lot.
Yeah, he's got a great matchup against the Bears, who've given up a ton of production to wide receivers. Let's take a look at some fan questions. We can't let you have all the fun here. So if we can fly in a couple of those questions. Gurley or Miles Sanders? Kimmy, which running back are you going with?
Oh, no. I mean, I was mean to Miles Sanders earlier in the show and said he's a fantasy villain. But Todd Gurley also just is so touchdown dependent that he's not great either. This is a very meh question, but Todd Gurley.
All right, next question. Mike Davis or Josh Jacobs at RB2? Marcus, I'm going to give you this tough one.
Ooh, that is a tough one. I think I'm going to go, as much as I had some hand-wringing over Josh Jacobs earlier, I might go with him just because when he's on the field, he tends to be kind of the only running back the Raiders use. I still think Curtis Samuel's going to get some touches for the Panthers.
Love it. All right, next question. Michael Thomas or Tyler Lockett, Florio?
They're pretty close. I'm going to go with Michael Thomas there just because I could see that game being a little bit of back and forth, not back and forth, but them having to throw a little bit more. I think the Seahawks are just going to ride Chris Carson today against the Jets.
Oh, don't say stuff like that. That's not cool. Jonathan Taylor, James Conner, or Tyler Boyd for a flex. I'm going to go with Jonathan Taylor. Don't want to step on anybody's toes if you're going to be talking about him later, but it seems like he has now earned that number one role with the Indianapolis Colts. One of the big things is that he's catching the ball out of the backfield. Had a great touchdown reception last week. So we'll go with him. Thank you so much for keeping those questions coming in. Keep them going. But guess what? Time now for Sunday Fun Day! Hey, who is a player who is going to pop off and be one of the top scorers this week? Michael F. Florio, let's start with you.
You heard Kimmy talking him up earlier, but I think Derrick Henry is absolutely going to eat this week. He gets a Jacksonville Jaguars defense. They're in the top 4 in fantasy points allowed to running backs. He is averaging over 20 fantasy points against them in the last 3 seasons, and in that span, he already has over 40 points in a game against them. And we know when the weather gets a little bit cold out there, you hear MJD talk about it all the time. They love to feed him. I think Henry goes off today.
Florio, this is why I love you, because we agree on everything, including Derrick Henry, but I got to throw another name out there. It's my guy, Keenan Allen, truly a wide receiver one now that Justin Herbert is his starting quarterback. He's had a receiving touchdown in 5 of the last 6 games, over 11 targets a game. That is tied for most in the NFL, not just amongst wide receivers, but any receiving player on the offensive side of the ball. Amazing matchup against the Falcons, allowing the 2nd most fantasy points to wide receivers. Both him and Justin Herbert are going to eat today.
I'm going to kind of stay with that Charger theme and go with Austin Eckler. And Rank, you pointed it out that the Falcon run defense has not been awful this year, although some of it I think is because teams have had so much success throwing it against them, they just haven't run it quite as much. But I don't think that impacts Eckler because he's a guy that when he's there and on the field is a candidate to get double-digit targets most games. He had 11 catches a couple of games ago. So I think he can end up having a good day, whether it's as a runner or receiver. I'm expecting big things.
Yeah, I didn't want to step on anybody's toes to talk about Jonathan Taylor because I knew he was on the rundown. Oh, it was me who was going to talk about him. Just again, to reiterate, 15-plus fantasy points in back-to-back games. The Raiders have allowed the 5th most fantasy points to running backs this season, and they've allowed a top 10 running back in 3 straight games. He's the 24th most expensive RB in DraftKings. So that's something to take a look at, too, if you're playing a little daily fantasy. Let's go to the quarterback position. Oh, that was Sunday Funday. Is it still Sunday? This is still Sunday Funday. Do the horns again. I just love them. Let's move to the quarterback position. Kimmy, who is a quarterback you think you can trust with the playoffs on the line?
It's your quarterback for the Chicago Bears. Just kidding.
Yeah,
it's Deshaun Watson. Just kidding. Your team did draft him. Boo. They suck. Just kidding. No, Deshaun Watson taking on the Chicago Bears today. He's had 300-plus passing yards in 3 straight games, as well as 30-plus fantasy points in 2 of the last 3 games. The Bears are allowing top 5 fantasy quarterbacks in consecutive weeks. I think this is an easy start and an easy week for Deshaun Watson to ball out and show Chicago that they really missed the mark by not drafting him.
Hey, have we mentioned that we think Russ is going to ball out this week? Because I think Russ is going to ball out this week. Russell Wilson against the Jets. This, we keep saying, is a nice get-right spot for him. And I think even if they do give Chris Carson a pretty heavy workload, which is certainly possible, I still think Russell's going to do enough that you're going to feel pretty good about having him in your lineup.
Yeah, maybe I'm trying to reverse jinx him with the Carson talk because I'm facing DK Metcalf today. But one quarterback I'm not worried about is Justin Herbert. We've all been kind of talking up the Chargers today. I understand what he went out and gave you last week, but he's not facing the Patriots. He's playing the Falcons, who allow the most fantasy points to quarterbacks, and I think this is a get-right game for Herbert and all of the Chargers' offensive pieces. I'm firing all of them up in Week 14.
Love that call. My 2 quarterbacks, Justin Herbert and Aaron Rodgers. I have so many shares of both quarterbacks. And look, I know that I say Aaron Rodgers every week and my producer gets upset, but what do you want me to say? I want to be honest with the people. He's our number 1 quarterback coming into this week. Great matchup against the Lions, a team that he destroys every year. The Lions are without Okudah and Desmond Trufant. So I think that this is a huge opportunity right now for Aaron Rodgers to go out and score 60 fantasy points for you. No lie. I'm not even exaggerating. All right, let's talk about must-start running backs for Week 14. Marcus, who do you got?
We're going back to James Robinson, and I feel like after the early hype of the season, we just have gotten accustomed to him being productive. His floor this year has been 10 points. That is his lowest fantasy output game in any given week. So I don't care who the matchup is. Tennessee's been bad anyway, but I don't care who the matchup is. James Robinson needs to be in your lineup every week.
Yeah, I love Robinson. I also like Carson this week. I said earlier I think they're going to rely on him a lot. I could see Seattle playing with a multiple score lead in the second half. And even when they have to throw, the Jets allow the most receptions to running backs this year. And Chris Carson's been getting more involved in the passing game. I think they'll use him near the goal line. Fire up Chris Carson this week.
Show me Wayne Gallman taking on the Arizona Cardinals today. 6 touchdowns in the last 6 games combined, 13-plus fantasy points in that exact same stretch. The Cardinals have allowed 12 total touchdowns to running backs this season. Wayne Gallman is going to go ahead and make the 7 touchdowns over 7 games.
I'm going to be looking at David Montgomery. He's had at least 26 fantasy points in back-to-back weeks. Now he's going up against the Houston Texans, who have allowed the second most fantasy points to running backs on the year. I'm a huge David Montgomery fan. I think that once Bill Lazor took over the team, they're putting the ball into his hands. And honestly, they could do a better job of it. I think a lot of it is the offensive line. That could improve a little bit, but David Montgomery has been solid, even though the Bears have struggled with 6 consecutive losses. All right, let's move on to the wide receiver position. Michael F. Florio, you can't pick a player from your favorite. You know what? Actually, you can. Who are you going to go with?
I'm going with Cole Beasley here. I am a Bills fan, but that is not the only reason I'm picking him, I guess.
Fair enough.
He's been playing really well the last 2 weeks, last 3 weeks with Smokey Brown out, going over 100 yards and over 27 fantasy points in 2 of those 3 games. And I know you could see the Steelers matchup and get a little scared, but they actually allow the 5th most points to slot receivers this year, and that just so happens to be where Cole Beasley runs nearly 90% of his routes. So I like Beasley as a wide receiver 2 with upside this week.
Another guy with huge upside this week, it's Justin Jefferson. I like both him and Adam Thielen taking on Tampa Bay. But Justin Jefferson specifically, he's had 100-plus receiving yards in 5 games this season, 26-plus fantasy points in 2 straight games. He has been a monster, a beast. He's showing why he deserved that first-round draft pick. I love him today against Tampa Bay.
Justin Jefferson is another guy who I just feel like is locked and loaded all the time. Same with A.J. Brown. And this is a situation where it's hard to fade A.J. Brown at any point, but especially against a Titans secondary that has just been beset with problems all season long. A.J. Brown is a guy that has a high ceiling. We love his yards after the catch. I think he's in a smash spot here this week.
You know what? I want to talk about Mike Evans, and I like him so much. I'm going to be stealing some of Michael F. Florio's research that he gave us on Fantasy Live on Friday. And what he brought up was that the Vikings have allowed the most receptions and yards on deep passes this season. And this is an opportunity for Tom Brady, who has shown he wants to go down the field. And the Vikings have allowed the 4th most fantasy points to wide receivers this season. They've allowed 19 receiving touchdowns this year. That is tied for the 2nd highest total in the NFL. I know that I think by now we've destroyed the myth. We're the Scooby-Doo kids. We've pulled off the mask of the Vikings defense. Turns out it's actually the Jags. That's what it is. So we start all of our receivers against them. Let's move to the tight end position. You can't say Waller. You can't say Travis Kelce. So Kimmy, who would you go with?
I'm going to do a homer pick. My guy, TJ Hawkinson, fellow Iowa Hawkeye. He's been really consistent. I think he's having kind of the second breakout season that we were hoping Noah Fant would have, but TJ has kind of usurped him. He's had 13-plus fantasy points in 2 straight games, double-digit fantasy points in 9 out of the 12 games played this season. Such a favorable matchup today against the Green Bay Packers. So please fire up my guy, TJ Hawkinson. # go Iowa, go Hawks.
I'm looking at Eric Ebron. I don't think he went to Iowa. In fact, I know he didn't go to Iowa, but he is in a really good situation. The Bills actually have had their problems against tight ends this year. And so while I don't know which one of the receivers, I know maybe you got Chase Claypool, maybe it's Deontay Johnson. I do think Eric Ebron is going to see some opportunities. Weird thing, he's the tight end 6 right now, although that might speak more to tight ends than it does to anything Eric Ebron necessarily has done.
I like Ebron this week, and I also like Big Bob Tunyon. He has scored over 13 fantasy points and has a touchdown in 3 straight games, and his breakout season kind of started back in week 2 against this Lions team when he caught a touchdown and scored nearly 11 fantasy points. I think he can safely get you 13 this week.
You know what? I like Dalton Schultz. This is going to be my homer pick because my daughter is going to Stanford. I mean, she's 5 now, but we've already set a goal. I'm already that guy. Like, with my 2 kids, I'm like, one of you is going to Stanford, one of you is going to U of A. The daughter is the leader in the clubhouse of going to Stanford. 4 targets, though, for Dalton Schultz in the last 7 games, 4+ targets per game. The Bengals have allowed the 4th most fantasy points to tight ends this season. They've allowed a top 5 tight end in back-to-back games. Mike Gesicki, Evan Ingram were able to do that. He's a very good value if you're playing daily fantasy as well. So Dalton Schultz, you can fire him up. You know what? He might be able to bring you one of these fantasy trophies. I just want to reiterate this because this is so cool. We appreciate them sending these to us. You can go to NFL.com/fantasy trophy. Kimmy, how cool is this trophy? Tell me.
It is the coolest thing since sliced bread. And I'm taking it home and beating all of you fools in our fantasy league this year.
What was the coolest thing before sliced bread?
In the tiny football league, we had, they saw Kimmy holding this trophy on Fantasy Bites, and they're like, we need that. Get it in there. So good luck to everybody. Thank you so much. We appreciate you. Good luck in the playoffs. Thanks for watching NFL Fantasy Game Day, presented by Geico.